Hello everyone, welcome to the Crosslink Show. We're talking about the HeroMe Gen 6 suite and the future of HeroMe. And if you've seen the videos that I made on my channel, I've been talking about it for a while now. I've also implemented a few upgrades, so the HeroMe 5 and now the HeroMe 6 on my Ender printers. But actually, there is no better person to talk about all of this than the creator of the HeroMe Gen suite himself, Andrew Soderberg. So please welcome with me Andrew Soderberg to the show.
Hey Daniel, thanks for including me. I appreciate it very much to be able to speak with you and your viewers on what the HeroMe is all about and what's going on with Gen 6. So glad to be.
Thanks for joining. Happy to have you here. I would love to introduce you to the viewers. So if someone hasn't seen you or doesn't know who you are, maybe you can talk about what you're actually doing and what HeroMe is actually about.
Okay. I'm a lot of things, but for this topic, I'm a 3D designer. I've been 3D printing since 2014, but in about 2018, I got involved in updating and modifying for my CR10 and Ender 3 at the time, a cooling system to do a much better job than the stock cooling systems. And so I took over the development of the HeroMe and created all the generations. So all the ones that have generation, Gen 1 through now Gen 6, are all my development work. And it supports now literally millions of combinations of printer setups with hot end, extruder, fans, STLs, printer model, etc.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I think that's going to give everyone a good picture of what you're doing. I'm interested, since I have been using the HeroMe upgrades on my printers. I didn't look back too far, so the only thing that I actually knew was HeroMe Gen 5, but I'm interested. Where did this all start?
Okay, so I have to give absolutely credit where credit's due. The HeroMe was created by Kilo Cara. That's his handle. His name is Marcelino Mosquea. I probably am messing up his last name. A gentleman from the Dominican Republic who did the very, very first HeroMe back in July of 2018. And I actually got involved with him on a previous design of a cooling system that was a precursor to the HeroMe, giving him feedback and making tweaks and testing for him, etc. And then when he did the HeroMe, again, we did the same thing, tweaking, testing, and modifying it. But by late September, early October of 2018, he had to back away from being online. He had a baby, his wife had a baby, and so he had to focus on that. And so he kind of disappeared from the scene. I connected with him. So I started then making mods for myself, but I connected with him a few months later and said, hey, I'm building out this stuff. Do you mind me doing it? I still have, giving you credit, etc. But he saw that I'd now, by then, I think it was Gen 1 or Gen 2, instead of just supporting the CR10 and the Ender 3, I was supporting, a bunch of different printers and hot ends. And he gave me his blessing. So since late October 2018 through now, there's been Gen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now Gen 6.
That's a lot of iterations in a pretty short time, actually.
Yeah, there's been a lot of great feedback. I mean, the key thing that's different about my design than his is the standardization. That's one of the things I think that really helped the HeroMe take off, is that this base file, whether it be on the top, the bottom, the two sides, or the back, these positions of these mounting points are absolutely locked in stone, right? And that whether there are different cooling ducts, different fans, different extruders that fit on the top, different hot ends inside, the shell and the frame and the positioning is all the same. There's now over 600 remixes and add-ons that the community, and I stopped counting at 600. There's probably a lot more now than that. So I think that's one of the original design principles, besides being a great cooling system, to really, we can talk about that, of what's going on with cooling. But one of the design principles was this modularity and standards base, so that other people could do their own tweaks and additions and know that it would be it's both forward and backward compatible.
Yeah, that sounds you have a pretty great community there. I'm curious, like, when do you make the decision to make something yourself for HeroMe, or where do you rely on the community to do it themselves? Because I can I can imagine that having so many different variations to create yourself. If do you have all of these printers, for example?
So I do have quite a few printers. I've had, I think, about 20 printers since 2014. Many of them are mothballed. The first one was Micro M3D, M3D Micro. It was a Kickstarter project back in 2014. And then I had the Tico, which was also a failed Kickstarter project, but I actually was one of the few people that got one. I've got a couple of Wanhao Duplicator i3s. I've got 4 Ender 3s that have all been heavily upgraded. I've got an Ender 5 Plus, a 2 Trees Sapphire Pro, and now 4 Prusa MK3S Pluses, and then a couple of resin printers.
Okay.
So a lot of different ones, but obviously that's the thing about the open source community is you make a mod, you share it, you pass it on, other people make mods, and then people would start to say, well, gee, can I have this? Can I have that? And so I've got a different fan than you did. Can you make your duct work with my fan? And so it just kind of grew and grew out of there. So now with the latest release, the latest update that I'm doing with Gen 6, it's now over 300 parts.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of work. So maybe let's stick with the latest version. So let's talk about like what is new between HeroMe Gen 5 and Gen 6. So what are the main improvements that you made to the design?
The major differences is, well, number one, this example, you can see this has got threaded heat press inserts throughout. So that is a major design change. Whereas in Gen 5, all the places where I can now screw in, I would have had to have nuts in place, and there was captive nuts. And while it all worked for me well, turns out that M3 nuts from different manufacturers, the only thing that's standard is the threads.
That's right.
Of that hex nut, the height and shape of the hex nut is not standard. Obviously, people's own printers and the calibration on their printers are different. So the captive sockets where you would put the nuts in worked for me, but for some people it was too loose. For other people it was too tight. And so there have been a lot of complaints that, gee, you got to make it fit. Why doesn't it work? And so that was really to solve that problem, was to make everything threaded inserts.
I see.
That's one big change. I get so many questions, about why threaded inserts, and there are people who actually, the Gen 5 is still, it's out there. It's called Archive. It's frozen in time. But people who want to just use the nuts and M3 bolts, that's still possible. And like I said, and you asked, you could have a Gen 5 design that you built, and then go grab a Gen 6 part cooling duct, and it'll just fit fine.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I built the Gen 5 that I had a few issues with the nuts, and it was a little bit painful to assemble it because mine were too small and they were like kind of always falling out. And I was thinking about, should I glue them with super glue? Then I was a little bit afraid that the super glue would kind of go into the thread. Yeah, sometimes that happens to me. Like then I glue it in, and then the thread is also taking up the glue, and then like I couldn't deassemble it anymore because I like put in the screws very quickly, and so like it was a little bit of a nightmare. So that's why I was like super happily surprised by the threaded inserts, because that was like literally at the same time when I started using threaded inserts for another big project. And say, hey, this is cool. Let's use that.
Yeah, and there are other design improvements on the Gen 6. Another big design improvement is actually the heatsink cooling duct here for the fan that sits on top. This vane work and the channel body has been changed between 6 and 5 to properly get the airflow through the center to the heatsink. It changes, the shape of this changes based on the different hot ends that are there. So it had all been kind of static in one thing on the Gen 5, and now it's a bit more, it's more tailored to each hot end that's going to be behind it.
I saw that, and I didn't initially realize that change. And then like when I compared it, like I was a subtle change, and I was like, okay, that does something is different, but not exactly what.
Of course, the other thing about Gen 6, there's a lot of new parts There's new ADL sensors that are supported. There are new hot ends that are supported. New, and of course, a lot of. In fact, in the update that is available for my patrons now, that'll be available for the public on beginning of May. There's 32 new direct drive combinations of hot end and direct drive combos. You know, that's the other thing is I encourage people to post requests to me. You know, if they've got. Like I recently did the Voxel Lab Aquila. I recently did an ANET. I recently did a Tronxy. And it's just all I had to do was create a new gantry adapter, and everything about the Hero Me works once there's a gantry adapter.
How did you do that without owning the printer?
Yes, because I make sure I get a step or an STL file of the gantry adapter. I have created a few where that was not available, and I don't own the printer. But I had the person who needed it take several photographs of the, and then take calipered measurements, not only of the shape and size of the X carriage itself, but also center to center positions of all the hole mounts, so that I could mock up the X carriage and then mock up the gantry adapter.
I see. Yeah.
And there's oftentimes that they'll go test fit it. I mean, to make a tweak. And by the second time, it's right. Whenever I can find, whether it be from the vendor, which is rare, but does happen, or someone like myself has gone out and modeled. GrabCAD is a great place to get part models from 3D printers. Thingiverse has a bunch as well. The ones that are on Thingiverse that are not created by the vendor, you have to take with a grain of salt, because I've had 5 or 6 different Ender ones, different Ender 5s, and they don't line up. And so
I realized that Creality changed, for example, for the V2. I got a very early version of the V2, and that gantry even doesn't have holes for wheel touch mount from Creality.
Right.
So that came in a later version, obviously.
That's a great example. The Ender 3 V2, because they changed it midstream, I have 2 sets of gantry adapters that you'll have to print out 2, because there's no way for me to know to tell you which one you need based on the actual printer that you bought from them.
Of course, I printed the wrong one.
Another big change was prior in Gen 5 and prior, direct drives were through add-on parts that clipped to the V rails or to the X carriage. Maybe you got a micro Swiss direct drive mod or a printer mods where the extruder actually bolted to the X carriage, and there were lots of different separate parts. But that would happen is that if you had a extruder on top, there could be flex this way, and that could have problems when you're doing retractions.
Yeah, so, I had this. Actually, I have this on my printers. As you might have seen the videos that I made. So I have like the BMG setup on all of my printers now, and I actually brought the new Hero Me Gen 6, the direct drive version here. So I've printed these parts here, and yeah, what I actually started with on like most of my printers, like when I switched to Hero Me Gen 6 and this wasn't ready yet, I switched to the like the base, the standard base, and I still used my original BMG holder, but that is like mounted to the rail system, essentially, or to the wheels. And now I think yesterday I saw your post about the new version. I immediately started printing it, and that's what I'm going to go for my BMG setup, because I have the smaller motor.
Here's an example all assembled where I've got the Bondtech LGX mounted, and it is literally mounted directly on the top of the Hero Me base. So there is no flex. It is all locked in place.
Oh yeah, looks good.
The PTFE tube that goes down there is totally locked, totally surrounded. There's no flexing going on. And so that's a major thing about Gen 6 is I now have LGX, LGX Lite, Sherpa Mini, Sherpa Micro, Orbiter 1.5, Orbiter 2.0, Bondtech BMG, BMG M. What else? Of course, I support the Micro Swiss kit. There's probably others I'm missing, but now the direct drives mount directly to the Hero Me. So that's now the top has become a new standard mounting point.
I saw that there's no place anymore for the PTFE coupling, so they seem to be unnecessary now.
Yeah, the couplings are unnecessary because it is captive all the way from the top to the bottom in the unit.
Yeah, I have it here. So I was like, when I saw it, I was like, okay, what's the change here? But it seems that Like the actual path is very short.
Yeah.
And would you recommend also removing the PTFE coupling from the actual cooling
Yes.
block? So
Yes.
nothing anymore.
Yep. You don't need the coupler in there
Mm-hmm.
because the top of the hot end is right up against the bottom of the Hear Me base. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all captive. There's no flexing going on.
Awesome. Yeah.
So we got threaded inserts. We've got a direct drive standardization now. Another big change, a great improvement, is in the part cooling ducts with this Gen 6. While in the early generations I designed them myself, a couple of years ago I connected with a gentleman who is a user of the Hero Me who had some improvement suggestions. A gentleman by the name of Craig West, AC West on Thingiverse, and he's a designer that uses OpenSCAD, which is a parametric design tool to design ducts through code. And so he and I collaborated on doing all the ducts that are in the kit now, and he did most of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So I had in Gen 5 32 different cooling ducts for 4010s, 4020s, 5015s, 5020s, both in single and dual fan scenarios, all with dual ducts. And the big change is that the ducts themselves have much larger openings, which eliminates the back pressure that was happening for some people, that allows a much smoother laminar flow, so you get much more airflow across the tip. Also, the duct tips are tapered to point downward below the nozzle, so you're not cooling the nozzle itself, you're just cooling the part below it. And so those are all new. But in addition to that, you've probably heard of the Fadus Rapido UHF.
Yeah.
It's a competitor
to
to 3D's V6. It's actually a very tall hot end. So now you've got a hot end that is literally probably an inch taller than any other hot end. Well, the cool thing, again, about the side of the Hero Me is that you can adjust the cooling ducts up and down to fit your scenario, but that one just went beyond what this could do. So there are now a full set of the ducts that have longer tips to be able to reach for V6 Volcano and for the Rapido HF and UHF hot ends. So that's a set just for long and tall ones. And then another set of 32 ducts, the same selection of ducts, for the Micro Swiss direct drive kit. Micro Swiss.
How's that different? Is this a different size?
It's the same but different. It's the exact same duct shape, but the difference is they're now, instead of taller ducts, they're longer ducts, because that's the other thing, is in all of the Hero Me's, except for the Micro Swiss, the position of where the nozzle is in relationship to the whole thing is always the same.
Okay.
But because the way that Micro Swiss actually has the extruder built into the X gantry plate, the hot end can't be moved. So it has to be exactly where they designed it. So my gantry adapters don't have that offset. And so my nozzles have to be longer to reach back further to where their nozzle is when it's mounted.
I see.
And then that actually brings up another thing that's part of it. You'll see here that the duct tips are tapered in, and that the nozzle is not centered between them. That's on purpose, because you'll see.
Yeah, I was wondering. I when I printed it multiple times now, I was always like, this is kind of misaligned. What's happening? Am I wrong?
That's the other thing, is these ducts have all been CFM tested with computational fluid dynamics.
Okay.
To get the best design. And what's going on here? Other ducts from people, they point directly at the nozzle. Well, what happens when you get two airflows hitting straight on?
They collide, yeah.
You collide and you've got turbulence, nothing but turbulence. You want to have a laminar flow. And so think of an upside down Y. Two streams that come together here at an angle and then go out. So that's what is happening here, is this is exactly positioned right, that the ducts are angled to hit that flow, and this would hit that flow, and it pushes the air this way. In fact, creating a slightly lower pressure zone on this side to pull air through. So that's exactly on purpose. So all of these ducts have been fully fluid dynamic tested to be of the right shape and size.
I see. So this sounds like a real engineering topic compared to probably some of the most ducts out there. Probably haven't been tested in that kind of way.
Probably the biggest competitor that everybody knows is the Petsvang from David Petzel, and it's a really nice design. In fact, he started his design about 6 months before the Hero Me existed. I actually back then had used his duct, but it's, for me, it's just too tall, it's too gainly, and he's had to make different versions of the whole Petsfang to support different printers. And that's where the Hero Me is different, is it's one design, shape, and size, and by using different adapters, that's the other thing, is on the backside, as I said, the backside is where I can support all the different printers, because there's one small gantry adapter plate that interfaces between the base and the X carriage that it mounts to. So it's very easy to adapt the whole Hero Me system to another new printer model, because I just have to match up the whole mounting holes for the gantry adapter to do that.
The changes that you described, I think it's a great improvement. The question, although, is if I already have a previous version, would you say that like it is recommended to switch, or like where's the point where I actually need to switch to Hero Me Gen 6?
That's the thing. If you've already got a Gen 5 built, because everything is backward and forward compatible, all these positions and mounts are identical. You, again, there's a big improvement in the cooling duct. So I would say if you've got a Gen 5, just reprint the cooling duct and mount it to your Gen 5, and you'll get the better performance from the new duct. But if you do, and we all end up getting jams and clogs, and we've all seen online the huge, blob monsters, that happen, and you have to disassemble the hot end to get at it. Having the Hero Me Gen 6 with threaded inserts makes it very fast and easy to disassemble and reassemble for maintenance, because
I see.
You don't
so
have
probably the next time, like you have to do some maintenance, is a good time to switch the base at least.
Yes, if you have to do maintenance, I would suggest replacing the base. But if you've got a Gen 5 all set, the only thing I'd recommend updating is to start by just reprinting the new ducts, because you'll get better cooling. That's the other thing in this design. I want to really talk about the manufacturers. People are trusting that these manufacturers are making a great design, and they're getting better and they're better. But in the case of part cooling, it's always been an afterthought. They just slap on the cheapest fan, a 4010 radial fan with a very cheap little duct to point some air down there, and it's a checkbox for them. Okay, we got that feature done. They've done literally no design work, with the exception maybe Prusa in Europe, although I've improved on Prusa's ducting. But the Chinese manufacturers that are all really derivatives and clones of each other, it's a checkbox. And so you really don't get great part cooling from those designs. And that's really why this all started in the first place, is we wanted to improve on what was there. With the Hero Me, you can do extreme overhangs at the 70, 80 degree level. And in fact, there's a couple of videos on YouTube, and I've done it at 300. You can do bridging. I've done 300 millimeters to 2 towers, bridging across 300 millimeters with no supports and no sagging.
Okay, that's powerful. That's powerful.
And finally, the extra benefit when you do dual fans is I never run these more than 40% power. So they're whisper quiet.
Me neither, yeah. So maybe with the exception, but maybe I'm making a mistake there. So a bit of bridging, I use them at a higher speed, I think 70%, but I think it's like actually blowing the bridge more into a certain direction, or blowing it out of the way. That's not a good thing.
For overhangs and bridging, I will spin the speeds up to maybe 60, 65%.
Okay. So I'm not that wrong, actually.
You're not too wrong. Again, every different fan manufacturers varies. And so it could be that you might have to scale back a bit more, because you might have faster fans than others. So again, fans are out there you can get as cheap as $2, but really high quality fans from Sunon, the Maglevs, and Delta, they're $10 to $15 a piece, and they are really powerful. So you can run them at even lower speeds. So that's also a variable, is what your source of fan is.
Maybe let's think about the setup itself. I got some questions from the community. So for example, when I showed my first version of my Ender 3 V2 upgrade with the Hero Me Gen 5, a few people were commenting like, how is this not slowing you down because it's a heavy setup. So in my case, of course, it's like I have the direct drive. Obviously, HeroMe can also be used for Bowden setups. But what's your experience with using this heavier setups with dual fans, printing speeds, for example?
Yeah.
Faster
So
speeds.
again, everybody's going to make their own choices. If you want to do speed benchy tests, right? Everybody's doing speed benchy tests or doing Bowden, right? Or they're using the new Sherpa Micro, to really get the weight down, because it's all about moving that, inertia of the hot end around. For most everybody else, if you're not doing speed benchy tests, trying to do 2,000 millimeters a second, you're not going to get it on a small bed anyway. The acceleration just doesn't get you there. The weight, if having a direct drive to get the benefits of doing everything from flexible filaments to getting a more accurate part, because you can reduce the retraction. The weight is not that big a deal. The weight for most 3D printers having this sort of thing on there, give you an example. Everybody seems to think that Prusa, I do too, is a great printer. It's a tank. You build it right, and it just works and works and works. And for most of mine, I've not done, well, it's not true. I've done only one upgrade to all my Prusas, is that they're on a Wham Bam Mutant, which is the ability to change out the hot end very quickly. So that's the only mod I've done there. But Prusas are all direct drive with the extruder and motor on it, and that weight is not a problem. So the plastic of the HeroMe and the two fans is tiny, tiny weight compared to what you have in the way of a direct drive.
I mean, there's obviously other options that are lightweight, so the Orbiter, for example, and I mean, there is generally kind of a renaissance of the direct drive. So like when I started, the direct drive was the standard basically, and then Bowden came, and like every other printer that came out had a Bowden setup. I honestly had nothing but problems with Bowden until I switched to an all metal hot end by Bondtech, like on the Ender series, and I did this also with the HeroMe upgrade. Since then, I didn't have any problems anymore with clogging, but since switching to direct drive, there was zero issues anymore. So I think it's the future.
I really don't think weight is a problem. Again, unless you're
going I'm printing standard speeds, right? I have these projects going where I don't worry if I have to print something 24 hours. I could print it in 16 hours, but the results weren't as consistent, so to say.
So didn't have the printer on this, I run this between 100 and 150 millimeters per second speeds all the time with no problems. And then there's times where I'm printing it at 60 or 70 millimeters a second. Again, it depends on what the accuracy I need. Obviously what size nozzle I'm using. A bunch of different variables you get into. But this big, bulky, with the LGX and stepper motor is not a problem. So one of the other things we didn't talk about on the HeroMe that is kind of an Easter egg, the bottom is now also a standard. So
I was thinking about like even in the first version or the HeroMe 5, I was wondering what are like these two holes for, because I didn't see any purpose for. I think it was already here in this one. Yeah. Here it is.
So what that is for? Is everybody and his brother who are doing fancy printers there, and they want to run them faster. They're going after those speed benchy tests. They use a little thing called a ADXL345 accelerometer, and so that is the mount point for this little tiny PCB to do the accelerometer for Clipper. It's designed for use for the shaping. To make the performance of that printer so much better. I expect Marlin in some future version will do something that could take advantage of this as well. But this is used by people who run Clipper, and so that's the mount. And then alternately,
this is also an M3.
No, M2.5.
That's why it's smaller. I was like, okay, why is this so small? Doesn't fit the M3.
Smaller screws for that small PCB board. If someone goes to my profile page on Thingiverse, and you can see my collections, there is a HeroMe collection with over 600 pieces. Whenever somebody lets me know they've done a remix or whatever, I add it to that collection. So it just gets bigger and bigger. And so there's a guy that did a adapter mount for the 4010 fan that fits after the fan is on, and is a little upright blade that doesn't block the air coming into the fan, but allows you to mount the ADXL 345 right here. So there's a little adapter that if you don't want to put it underneath, there's one there. So there's a couple of different ways to mount that accelerometer. I think the Hero Me is successful as it is really for the two key design principles. One, it's got to do great cooling. And two is that it's a standards base that makes it really easy, that, you know, isn't going to change. And if you can do 3D design, your time, not just for yourself, but for others, is well worth it, because these mount points are all locked in stone. So people ask me, why don't you can you do a Hero Me for Hemera? Can you do a Hero Me for the new Creality S1, for the Ender 3 S1? Can you do one for the BTT BIQU H2? And these are the ones where it's the fully integrated extruder and hot end all as one object. Well, they're huge. I mean, I have one here in my cabinet. Yeah. There's no way that a Hero Me, to be a Hero Me and also stretch to wrap around one of those, is going to work.
Yeah, that's why I switched. Like, I had the BIQ H2, and it isn't bad. But it's also not perfect. Like, it's not very powerful. Although they claim it is, but the cooling is a big problem. Cooling is a big issue, and so that's the reason why I got rid of it and switched back to the, like, I basically just took the original hot end, but I modified it with like all the other upgrades I told you, like the
thing is,
the
a
heat
lot
break.
of people think that the H2 and the Hemera and this one from Creality and a couple other vendors have their own direct drives. They think, oh, this is brand new tech. No, that was the way it was. For example, I've got two Wanhao i3 duplicators that are from 2015, and that's the hot end. It is a direct drive and hot end integrated into one small package with the stepper motor attached to it. It handles flexibles like
absolutely simple, yeah.
Because it is a tiny, fully integrated setup. They've been around for a long time.
Yeah, and that's kind of coming back for a lot of printers now, and it makes sense to have smaller setups now. Like, probably the parts have become smaller, so the motors have become smaller, and it's probably not that heavy as on an ANIT A8 as it was like when I started. Like, this was my first printer. It was a heavy thing. The Hemera is also pretty heavy.
Yep.
So it's a huge
so that's
thing.
why I kind of shudder when people say, oh, the Hero Me is heavy. Not when you compare it against a Hemera or any of these others. Come on, it's the plastic that's in a Hero Me is nothing compared to the extruder and the stepper motor and the hot end.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably shave off a few grams by using the lightweight fan ducts. You can use only single fan.
There is another hot end, another part cooling system that I designed that has a nice little following. And it's called MediaMan's Minimalist. So if you go to Thingiverse and search for MediaMan's Minimalist, it is a collar. It's for the E3D V6 collar and clones. It's a collar that mounts on the X carriage. It's a bracket to mount your ABL, and it's a very lightweight bracket and duct for one fan. And it's extremely lightweight, extremely small, very little plastic, works like a charm, but it's a single duct, and it's got its own little following.
I see. Okay, yeah, it's good to know, but I don't mind the weight too much. But although I was thinking about going for a single fan setup, but then I was just back and forth between what's more important to me, and cooling is. I say, okay, I want a perfect cooling. I don't want to print too fast. It doesn't really matter to me so much. So what I want is reliability.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who said, oh, gee, I can build something better than a Hero Me. I said, go for it.
Yeah, sure.
The Hero Me was not meant to be the perfect thing for all printers, because it is a standard. There are design considerations and choices that are made that are compromises, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but those compromises are part of this design. So can you build an assembly for hot end fans and ABL and direct drive that's lighter than this? Yes. Yeah. And so here's a perfect example of a compromise. Because of the gantry adapter, with the exception of the Micro Swiss direct drive, everybody's going to lose 9 millimeters of wide build space. unless you adjust your platen to change where your bed slinger is, because your nozzle is going to be 9 millimeters closer to the front of the printer than without a gantry adapter, because there's that standoff. But that standoff was designed so that those hot ends that currently mount to the gantry adapter, and all those hot ends that mount without that and mount straight up in some device like the Hero Me, all these nozzles are in the exact same place. That's why these ducts work. That's why the 96 ducts all work, because the position of that nozzle doesn't change in relationship to the whole system.
Yeah, that's an interesting fact. That's an interesting fact. It's probably something that I discovered by accident. And I adjusted
up front is a 9 millimeter offset. And in the case of enders, I don't know about every ender, but most enders, there's 4 bolts. There's a 40 by 40 rail going across, and another 40 by 40 rail going this way. And there are 4 bolts that hold those together. You can undo those 4 bolts and move the thing back just half an inch, or about half an inch, and just mount it with 2 bolts. And you've solved you don't lose any build space, because you've now moved the whole platen forward.
Andrew, there is a little controversial topic that I want to bring up. You probably know what I mean. With Hero Me Gen 6, you made a decision that the documentation is available only for patrons. What drove you to the decision to do that now?
Right. Well, looking back, I wish I had done it a year ago. But you make choices when you make choices. The thing is, I literally put thousands of hours into this, not getting paid, in designing it. I've spent hundreds of hours over the last years answering literally 3,000-4,000+ questions. I can't keep that up and pay for the mortgage and all the other things. So I needed to find a way that my value add is worthwhile, is worth something. If you think about it, if you worked somewhere and I came to you and said, I want you to do this for me, and I'm not going to pay it, right? So I buy the milk you make if you're a milkman, but I want you to go milk my cows, and you want to get paid for that, right? So that's what's really going on here. Is the Hero Me is open source. The Hero Me Gen 5, Gen 6, Gen 7 will always be open source. But my knowledge and my support and my documentation, I think, is worth something. And so in January of this year, January 10th, I set up Patreon. I moved 52-page parts cross-reference and assembly guide behind the Patreon wall. I think I'm sure there are people on the internet in forums who've said, "Oh, gee, now that you got to spend some money, I won't never do that. I'm all open source for free forever." Great, I respect their decisions, but surprisingly, there's been a lot of people. I've now got nearly 1,500 patrons in just 10, 11 weeks, and you can get the documentation for as little as $2. You don't have to subscribe forever. You can subscribe for a day. You get the rest of the month anyway. Get the documentation and go away for just $2. But I also have other tiers above that I offer additional services, additional support, and I'm doing some things that are exclusive. So, for example, a big, huge upgrade to Gen 6 right now is exclusive to my patrons for the month of April. Come May 1st, it'll all get published to Thingiverse and all the other popular STL libraries, Cults 3D, Prusa printers, Thangs, etc. The other thing is that the Hero Me that's published, I've updated the file names so that you can interpret what the part is. And it's not hard. If you've got the ability to preview, like whether it be in your slicer or whatever, to preview the STLs and look at the file name, you can determine what you need. You have this, a V6. So you want one that's the E3D V6 in the file name. You've got a 5015 fan. Well, then you want a part that's got 5015 in the file name, etc. So the file names are pretty straightforward, that people can do it on their own if they want to do it on their own.
Yeah, I guess people can figure it out. If they have some experience, they probably can figure it out themselves. I think I mentioned that in the video. I also think that, like, in general, having a paywall sounds in the first place, it sounds bad, but it's actually for the creator, it's something essential that he gets paid. I think that's a total valid point.
Yeah, and I've got a Discord
absolutely.
server set up now, and I've got several hundred of my patrons that are on the Discord server.
Yeah,
and that's been really collaborative. I'm communicating with them almost daily, and of course, my patrons who are not on Discord, I handle the messages that come in to the Patreon interface. And so, yeah, it's working out for me. It's working out for my patrons, and I get it. Somebody doesn't like that idea, want to go elsewhere. I respect their choices.
If people decide to take the documentation from Hero Me Gen 6 and like post it somewhere on the internet, it doesn't really make sense. Like there's probably going to
be out of date. So yeah, there have been about 8 or 9 places that when I did the Gen 6 and I took the docs down, that people had posted the PDF or actually embedded the content into a web page. And so I did do DCMA takedowns on them, and I think 6 out of 8 took them down.
There's always going to be the people, and I think the point of having Patreon is not to prohibit, but it's more like you support the creator because you value what he's doing.
So and I've actually had a number of patron, and in fact even non-patron supporters who have built their Hero Me Gen 5 or Gen 6 come to my defense on a Thingiverse when people say, oh, it's behind a paywall. They've actually, without me having to go say it, they say, hey, $2, come on, it's worth it. And you get all this documentation and you can ask questions and get support from the community. In fact, Thomas in Germany, Thomas, right?
Yeah, sure.
And his whole open source tirade versus patents, right? You remember that one?
Yeah, I think he built a CNC machine and then they forced him to like not publish it or publish the video or something.
He actually did this video very much a rant on patents and how they were bad for innovation, and the community straightened him out, and he did another video later. Goes, okay, I see the value of patents, and where it's not about preventing or locking things down. It's about being able to afford to do new design. That I got to have a way to make money off of my work and not having me ripped off by the Chinese or someone else, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a way of protecting, my stuff, but it doesn't mean it can't get used. I will license it. I want my stuff to be used. And so, there are reasons for open source, but there's also reasons, valid reasons for commercial or patron where, it's, do you see the value add of what I'm doing in my documentation and my knowledge, etc. And again, that's where I draw the line is these will be open source, but if you want me to answer questions at 3 a.m. or whatever, then come on, be a subscriber on Patreon.
That makes sense.
Oh, it's just me. I just have one question, and it's never one question.
Yeah, sure.
If they don't get that there's this wide world out there. And over the last 4 years, it's easily been 3,000 or 4,000 questions. All of the previous generations are still on Thingiverse, deprecated. So you can find them, and the files are all there. But it's kind of frozen in time.
Yeah, I mean, the same when I'm doing a video, let's say, I think I planned for some video where I would say, okay, I have this Ender 3. That's the part that I'm using. That's not to offend you as the creator of a Patreon. Actually, I mentioned it much of the time, so I would say, I support this creator because his work is great, and we are just doing an example here, but we're never disclosing the documentation or neither going to be making it available for download. So the intention is to make people aware of how the process works, how to select parts, and how easy it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's more, I think it's on the positive side, even though there is kind of a partial disclosure of like, okay, this printer requires XYZ part. I think that's kind of obvious, but the intention of the patron is, as you said, it is not to hinder you from building your printer. It's about appreciation and support. The only thing that I would say like about paying once $2, I think it's like in the long term, it's probably making sense to stay patron because you can get updates. Right?
Yeah,
because if you like, let's say you had become a patron 4 weeks ago, or I don't know when it was exactly released, but when you like hit the first version of Hero Me Gen 6, I saw the documentation and I was looking into it and I said, okay, that there is things not updated yet. There is things mentioning parts that are obviously still HiroMe Gen
So
5. There's
that's what I'm
pictures.
finishing today is the updated duct. So the Gen 6 that I sent you and that's posted on Patreon is all the new files. In fact, last night someone told me that Sherpa came out with their new micro. So there's a Sherpa Mini, now there's a Sherpa Micro. Well, last night I made the HiroMe bases for the hole positions for the Sherpa Micro. So that got added at the last minute. But with over 300 parts, I'm still editing this document.
Let's talk a little bit about the future. What's coming for HiroMe, because you're probably not stopping at this point.
Yeah. So there is something that I'm working on. I don't have something to show yet. It's still in an alpha stage. I'm still doing my testing, but I'm doing a version of the HiroMe called the Magnet Edition. And that one is going to be a Patreon exclusive. It borrows from the HiroMe design shape. The difference is on the back on how the whole HiroMe attaches to the X carriage is going to be connected by 4 very strong neodymium magnets that will hold the base and fans to the back, and that it's also keyed. So, I get magnets. You know that when you put 2 magnets together, you get slide and slip and all that. Well, the parts are keyed, so it's locked in place, so it's not going anywhere. And so the only way it can come off is by pulling it off. And so this is something that can be used to get easy access to your hot end for maintenance, etc. It's not meant to be a tool changer. That's what things like, the Mutant from Wham Bam and other vendors out there that do tool changers where you swap the whole thing in 15 seconds. But
so all your cables are still connected, and you have easier maintenance access, but that's basically the purpose, right?
So so this is going to be a version of both the Bowden and the direct drive bases and the gantry adapters to be a magnet mount. So that's coming out in the next couple of months. Again, I've got 150 parts between all of the bases, direct drives, and all the gantry adapters that I've got to modify to use the magnets that will be embedded in the sides here.
Okay, so it's not just the base that you're changing, so the base and the gantry adapter, but is there other things that you have to change?
No, that's it. The base and the gantry adapter for the Magnet Edition is the only thing that changes. I thought about and did some experimenting about, would I do that for like a BL Touch or a CR Touch or another? And no, I found that it's not really appropriate for that, because you need to be able to adjust that BL Touch up and down to your particular hot end setup, and the magnet system is not going to make that possible. So
yeah, that's not possible. That's probably something that would be really hard to achieve. And I mean, the main purpose, I guess, is to get access to the hot end or to the cooling block, basically.
And the cool thing is I got really lucky is that, in fact, I've got some of the magnets right here. They're stronger. These things are sized such that it will fit in my current design at the back. So none of the geometry of this had to change. I just had to redesign these back parts to be able to mount the magnets in it. And so all the existing fans, direct drives, other stuff, all hot ends, nothing changes about that. It's just these 2 points.
I can imagine getting the magnets, since they probably have a specific size. We have the metric system here, so probably everything is different.
Everything to me is metric.
Okay, so what do you think? Where would we source these magnets from if we would want to build it?
Amazon sells magnets, and they claim they've got neodymium magnets. They don't. They're just glorified refrigerator magnets, for picking something on. No, these are sourced from commercial suppliers that do sell to retail, that do have typically a minimum quantity of 12 or 24 magnets you have to buy. There is a vendor I've got in the US lined up. I will be looking at vendors in Europe as well, and one in Asia, one in Europe, one in the US. I'm not going to share the size of this yet, because I don't want. Because when I was prototyping, I was using disc magnets, more and smaller disc magnets. And in my early prototyping, while it was fine for a Bowden setup, when you go to direct drive, you've got to be able to hold much more weight. And so I went to the bar magnets, which more than almost tripled the amount of weight that these can hold versus the disc magnets. They are readily available, they're standard, and like I said, I've got some homework to do to find the vendors in Europe. I've got some great contacts with some designers in England and in Germany that I'm working with that are going to help me, find the places that they know to get suppliers.
I see. Are you talking to anyone about a commercial release of like some pre-production parts, like pre-printed parts or pre-assembled parts?
So yeah, fancy you should say that. There's been many discussions. In fact, there's been discussions about taking the base and doing it in aluminum, milled aluminum.
I see.
And have it all pre-drilled and everything. So that's been discussed, along with doing the gantry adapters in aluminum stamped. There's nothing that really could properly be pressed. It's more of, in the case of this, it would be CNC milled. And the gantry adapter would be similar to X carriages we have now, where it's an aluminum sheet that's folded and rolled out. I've had discussions on that. I have interest from one company that sells peripherals in the 3D space. No deals are done yet. We're still in the thinking stage of that. What I am doing parallel, though, is that there's a website called QB3D, and that's C-U-B as in boy, E-E, so it's B as in a buzzing bee. So QB3D.com. And that's a marketplace where someone who doesn't own a 3D printer can go and pull from a library, or they can even bring their own STLs they found, and it's local printing. So you can find someone who has 3D printer services, someone like me, or even a business that's local to you, to print it out at a reasonable price. Additionally to that, though, from this perspective, is that creators who have their own designs can upload those to the library and then charge a commission or a licensing fee for $1 or $2 or $3.
I see. Yeah.
And so I'm going to be putting all over time, it'll take a while, the HeroMe parts on QB3D, such that, somebody in Italy could go to that website, find the parts that they want, request a quote from someone near them in Italy, and have it be low. Because again, the problem is shipping. It's about the cost to shipping. So the closer you can get someone, even to come and pick up, is going to save a lot. So that's a way that I'm going to, people will be able to get pre-printed parts, whether it be from me or elsewhere, but they don't have to get it from me. They can get it from any maker. And when you post these, I also put in the print specifications, the layer heights. There's a bunch of profile stuff so that the person who's printing this part, who may never have printed it before, is going to do the right thing to print it correctly.
I can imagine, like, if you only have one printer and it's kind of broken, then it's probably pretty hard to print a new upgrade. So I think it's a great idea to offer this.
The first jobs that I got from QB3D was someone was building a Voron, but they didn't have a printer to print the parts. And so he was sending parts orders to me to print the plastic parts he needed for his Voron kit.
I'm currently building a little 3D printing business, like, on the side, besides the fact that I'm running this YouTube channel. So it's going well, but like, I forced myself into this journey, and you saw it, and upgrading my printers was absolutely necessary to get more reliability. So running a print shop, making money with 3D printing, I think that's a topic, it's a whole topic on its own. So if you, we could probably talk about it on another occasion, but I think it's a total different topic. It requires a lot more work than people can probably imagine.
And I mean, it's a great thing, but you're now physically, building things and shipping them off. And while I have it, it's not a primary thing. For me, it's a secondary thing. I would rather do the design work. I also do commercial 3D design work. I was involved in the design of the mobile plate for the Wham Bam Mutant. So, I've done commercial 3D design work as well. So that's where I think my value add is on the design side.
Thank you, Andrew. I guess we're going to wrap it up here. So thanks for coming to the show. I think we're going to see more stuff coming from you. I'm really curious to try out the new HeroMe Gen 6. I'm going to make some content about it, like upgrading my first Gen 5 printer to Gen 6. So that's going to come soon. And yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for the audience for being here. And
Appreciate you having me here. It's been
yeah,
great.
absolutely. It
I'm
was a
looking
lot of
forward
fun.
to, having been able to tell my story and people to see it. Love to hear what they think.
Absolutely. Thank you. And see you next time. Bye.